I think we can probably begin. It feels like the stream is kind of trickling down.
Jeffrey, yep, sounds good. Sorry. All right. We will start now. Okay, great. Okay, I'll begin. Oops, sorry. Oops, sorry, give me a sec. I'm trying to. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for a bit of a briefer from the election. I'm Jeffrey Wong, MRAC 1 AP 2021, and I'm the co-chair of Hong Kong GSD.
I'm Grace Chi, also MRAC 1 class of 2021, another co-chair of Hong Kong GSD.
And I'm Justin Ng, MRAC 1, year 2023. I'm the treasurer of Hong Kong GSD.
On behalf of Hong Kong GSD, we are incredibly excited to have you here with us. Before we begin, let me introduce Hong Kong GSD. We are a student and alumni group founded in 2018 by Anson Wong, an MLA1 student from the class of 2019. Through lectures and social events, our group hopes to provide a platform for students, alumni, designers, and scholars to exchange views and engage in conversation on design-related topics pertinent to Hong Kong.
We are very excited to have a distinguished group of guests with us tonight that represent different scales of architectural practices. Paul and Evelyn from New Office Works, Ken Wai from Aedas, and Florian Eidenberg from So Ill. Professor Paul Nakazawa, whom many of us know from the GSD, will be our moderator. Tonight's conversation will be focused around how practices are crafted, and we hope to use what we learn to form the basis of future events surrounding life post-graduation.
The event will start with 20-minute presentations from each firm, followed by a 30-minute discussion with Professor Paul Nakazawa. We ask everyone to please remain muted, but we welcome questions through the chat bar during the 3 presentations, which we will pass along to the professor before the moderated discussion. At the end of the formal discussions, we'll have smaller unrecorded breakout rooms where participants can then have an opportunity to chat with the panelists in a more casual context. So first up, we have New Office Works joining us from Hong Kong, Paul Zi and Evelyn Ting. New Office Works is an architecture and design firm in Hong Kong, founded in 2017. Besides architecture, Now's works extend to exhibitions for major events such as the 16th Venice Biennale, Hong Kong Pavilion, and publications for Log and Sandrock. Most recently, they won first prize in the inaugural Hong Kong Young Architects and Designers competition, designing and building the Growing Up Pavilion in the West Kowloon Cultural District. Paul is a graduate of Columbia GSAP and is teaching as adjunct assistant professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, while Evelyn graduated from MIT and is currently a lecturer at the University of Hong Kong. Welcome, Paul and Evelyn. Oh, Jeffrey, are you able to unmute?
Okay. Can you hear us?
Sorry about that.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Let us share our screen. Can you see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thanks to the Hong Kong GSD for inviting us to be part of the symposium. I think craft in the title is very telling. Craft usually describes something handmade, bespoke, suggests a lot of time involved with its making. And unlike mass production, craft is also heavily related to the place where it's created. Our practice is based in Hong Kong, where Paul and I are both from. And the concept of architecture is quite different to what we eventually learned from school as well as practiced overseas. And unlike the US and Europe, or even nearby countries like Japan and mainland China, where architects can launch their practice through residential projects and new but unproven ideas can be tested, due to the scarcity of land, such opportunities in Hong Kong is rather limited. The city's fabric is heterogeneous, a constant juxtaposition of program, form, and materials. Given such a context, the question of how to craft a practice and how to practice architecture actually is one that is frequently on our minds as a young author.
And to give you a little bit of background of our personal trajectories, I first actually got my first degree at RMIT University in Melbourne, and the school is known for its emphasis on idiosyncratic design methodologies, which usually loaded with expressionism and symbolism. And that is why it is not difficult for you to find buildings with bright colors and intense geometric motifs. And as a student, you question whether such expression and boldness are always necessary. And there is actually an origin of these trajectories, and this is the building where the architecture building department is located. Building is designed by the late architect Peter Corrigan, who was also a professor at the school. After finishing school in Melbourne, Corrigan went to the US and studied under Robert Venturi at Yale, and eventually brought back the rebellious attitude against modernism and international style. Instead, referencing local vocabulary such as brick, domestic vernacular, and other forms of found visual elements. It was many years after graduation that I realized while the school absorbed the formal language and bold color of Corrigan's architecture, it was his idea of drawing inference from the surrounding context that had the biggest impact on me.
In contrast, I was interested less in building and technical, tectonic aspects of architecture and more on the intangible relationships established by buildings. For example, movement, behavior, and perception. This is a photograph by Moholy-Nagy. The image shows the people as silhouettes. The angle of the photograph somewhat compresses the steps and heightens the relationship between the figures. I think architecture is also a lot about narrative and storytelling. So just as buildings use structure and sequence to form space, text also uses vocabularies to form a story. In J.G. Ballard's High Rise, for example, architecture is both the backdrop and the vehicle for the story. Literature is often used to critique various aspects of society in real life, and architecture, in addition to providing shelter, can also serve as a commentary and critical voice. So immediately after college, we both moved to Beijing, attracted by the scale and speed and sheer enthusiasm for building. On the one hand, we lived in the hutongs and were surrounded by traditional buildings. And on the other hand, the kinds of projects we were working on, large-scale cultural projects, were entirely foreign to our surrounding environment and formally much more exuberant. Further studies led us to New York and London, where we would work on competitions in our spare time and empty classrooms around campus and after hours. So when we moved back to Hong Kong in 2017, there was at the same time a familiarity and the feeling of being an outsider. And the desire to reacquaint ourselves with the city was the impetus behind a lot of our early projects. This is what our office space first looked like. It occupied a small storage space above a clothing shop, and we used old laptops to work on competitions and fans to ensure the laptops didn't overheat. We wanted to formulate a way to practice in Hong Kong, and we always had a fascination with the similarities between Hong Kong and LA. Although it might seem counterintuitive at first, particularly one being so horizontal and one being so vertical, if one looks closely, both environments can be seen as byproducts of the heavy presence of commercialism. Also, both cities are heavily involved in movie production, which generates a sense of exaggeration and dramatic quality to the everyday. One of the artists that really captures the spirit of LA is Ed Ruscha. His piece, Every Building on the Sunset Strip, catalogs buildings along Sunset Boulevard with a deadpan manner. And such an approach could be likened to both an architect doing site analysis or a cinematographer taking a long shot along the boulevard. And drawing inspiration from that, we tried to establish a framework so that we can draw influence from where we practice. Incidentally, it was also a period where we didn't have a lot of projects, but had a lot of time. And Hong Kong is an intermediary in many ways. We found this quality or function mediating between two extremes or opposing conditions to be present in many areas of the city. Middleman Hong Kong is a research project that we worked on. We made a total of 12 episodes, each looking at a specific element that mediates between two conditions, whether physical or intangible. For example, palm trees being a symbol of leisure while located in very dense urban areas. Shortcuts providing pedestrian access across extreme terrain. And the episode on escalators, which I'll play a short clip of. Looks at how it combines the speed and convenience of the elevator with the freedom and flexibility of the stair. It's quiet, continuous, and efficient. We first examined the history of escalators in Hong Kong, notably their use in department stores to move customers around while ensuring they never lose sight of the objects on display. And they quickly become features in the interior, longer and more complex, making users both spectator and spectacle. Not only does it serve the interior, but it also animates the building envelope, blurring the boundary between inside and outside. It occupies the street and becomes an autonomous urban element, creating a cinematic experience through dense city streets and lush mountainsides. The video format also emphasizes the continuity of the experience through various contexts of the city. In each video, we try to introduce a figure whose work captures a key aspect of the video's topic, which in this episode is writer Liu Yichang. His novel, Ted Besh, tells the story of two strangers who wander the city and cross paths just once in a movie theater. The title, which is a term that describes a pair of stamps accidentally printed in opposite orientations, describes this intersection. And in a similar way, I think escalators capture the duality of metropolitan life. We always end each episode with a short movie clip. Here, this is Wong Kar-wai's Chungking Express, and one of the most memorable scenes being the central escalators, where there's a brief, quite intimate intersection between the two characters on the street.
So after spending a lot of time making videos, we finally got an apartment project located in Hainan, China. The apartment has a view overlooking a golf course, therefore maximizing the view and connecting inside and outside was one of our main intentions. Our initial scheme for the project involved a series of frames that demarcate different activities such as sleeping, eating, and bathing. The result is a very open, garden-like interior, but we felt it was a lack of contrast and surprise. So we asked ourselves, could a domestic staircase have the same presence and autonomy as a shortcut that we saw around Hong Kong? We decided to put an enclosed spiral staircase right at the main entrance, which is at the bottom of the drawing. The more private spaces, such as bedroom, are placed on the ground floor, while the more public spaces accessed via the stair, such as kitchen, living room, is placed on the upper floor. And in the model photo, you can see we try to extend the balcony garden into the interior. Upon entering, this is the view of the stairwell. And once you walk out of the stairwell, the space opens up, and immediately you find yourself in an indoor garden. And the indoor garden can be further connected with the outdoor terrace via a large sliding door. From the upper floor, a bridge overlooks the stairwell. A glimpse to the indoor garden can be seen through a narrow slit in the concrete wall. And here's the view of the living room up on the upper floor. And this is these are some of the construction photos. And the last project that we are going to show is Growing Up. Growing Up is a pavilion located in the West Kowloon Cultural District. In terms of the site, the plot has a very clear boundary and orientation. Adjacent to the nursery park and directly opening up to the waterfront. Being in West Kowloon, we also wanted to relate to the site's growing arts and cultural center. That's how the idea of Growing Up came about. And at the same time, reflect the process of growing trees in the nearby nursery park. The pavilion has a simple volume, step ceiling along the waterfront, and also a sloped roof create intimate human scale towards the park, as well as opening up to the harbor front. On the north, we have a series of slender columns and the roof sloping down. And on the south, we wanted to create a high degree of porosity to the surrounding environment. We wanted an element of surprise from the entrance to the view and use timber spaces beneath the steps to create a screen and shield the harbor view. The tunnel cuts through the step landscapes so that you walk through a compressed space before being greeted by a 10-meter high roof and view of the harbor. To return to the idea of growing, we thought it was important for a cultural district to have elements of the city. We identified 6 characteristics of the city that are incorporated in various aspects of the pavilion, such as the narrow alley, the density of scaffoldings, the step landscape, the traditional roof where we would change the material into a lighter and more transparent material, and the palm tree that you see a lot around Hong Kong, as well as in the summer, taking the heavy rain that we have in Hong Kong as part of the architecture. We were working on Middleman's video concurrently with this competition. Therefore, the idea of drawing characteristics from the city plays a large part in this project. Beside different activities that take place at the pavilion, it almost serves as a framing device for the sunset. And the structure of the pavilion is made out of C40 pine and was constructed and tested in the factory in China. Before being transported on site and assembled, the column heights range from 3.2 meters at the lowest point to over 9 meters at the highest point. And here are the beams being craned into place. The roof cladding made from curved polycarbonate panel create a different sense of scale and to its traditional counterpart. Yet it is still small enough to be handled by a single construction worker. And this is the overall view of the completed pavilion. A pool at the base collects rainwater off the sloped roof. From certain angles, the pavilion seems to emerge from the surrounding landscape. And this is the view from the nursery park, where the harbor view is still hidden from the view and the tunnel draws people into the pavilion. On the other side, the roof opens up to a grander scale, and the transparency of the roof creates ever-changing shadow on the structure and the surrounding. We spent a lot of time tweaking the details of the roof so that there is a sense of rhythm between the roof cladding and the structure. And the view from the step looking towards the sunset. At night, the bright and dark area are in reverse. The underside of the step, which are darker during the day, becomes the brightest area. And we would like to again show a short film of the built pavilion, so you get a better sense of the sense of space and light and shadow. The pavilion has green on one side and concrete open space on the other side. And most people would approach the pavilion in the nursery park. And that's why we located the tunnel immediately right at that entrance from the nursery park. And as I said before, the pavilion also frames the harbor view. At the top of the steps, people can touch the structure, while on the other side, the structure hovers high above. Usually people sit wherever they find appropriate. And kids love to run around the pavilion up the shallow steps. And we really like this particular view as the pavilion is set against the Hong Kong skyline. So this is the tunnel that you walk through before revealing a larger space on the other side. And the step also acts as a screen that screens off the harbor view before you enter into the tunnel. Well, and that is our presentation. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce our next guest is Ken. So Ken Y is joining us this evening from Shanghai. He's the global design principal at Aedas, one of the largest architecture firms in the world, with a focus on building in Hong Kong and China. Ken became a part of Aedas in 2003, just 1 year after the company emerged from a merger between several international firms. And since then, he has become a cornerstone in the company's operation and success. Not only does Ken have extensive experience in large-scale developments that Aedas is known for, he is also well-versed in boutique small projects. Over the last 2 decades, he has developed a diverse portfolio ranging from the Sina headquarters to a single-family house for an art collector. Ken is now the leader of Aedas' Shanghai office, where he pairs business with a keen eye for design. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you very much. Let me share the screen. Can you see it?
Yep, looks
so. Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Besides being a design principal for Aedas, I'm also the honorary chair for RIBA, RBA, which is Royal Institute of British Architects in China and Asia. So I think my role is very keen to create a platform for designers across Asia and promote the kind of new design ideas in our region. A little bit about myself. I think most architect needs a mentor, and my mentor is Professor Christine Hawley, who's graduate of the AA, partner of Peter Cook. And I met her at University of East London when I was studying there, and she was the head of school. And she later became the dean of the Bartlett. Christine is more than a mentor. I think she's more like a friend. She helped me throughout my whole career, and sometimes she actually look at my designs as well. And I think it's important to have somebody you actually can talk to throughout your career. I am from Hong Kong originally, and I see myself as rather international. And I'm very interested in doing design in different cultures and different climates and different regions. So all through my career, I've been trying to work for international practices. And in particular, I work for Foster's and now in Aedas. And I felt that in Foster, I was able to pick up a lot of different ideas and approach to design, which is very useful for what I'm doing right now. I worked on several cultural projects, education projects, super high-rise tower, and infrastructure projects. And the way of thinking is quite original. I think a lot of times we have a lot of support from our friends, consultants, and we're able to push forward the envelope all the time. And this allowed me to continue my thinking and my research when I do my own projects in Aedas. And Aedas gave me a great platform to do the kind of work I was really thinking of doing. I came at a very interesting moment of Aedas when they were just starting to become an international practice from local practice. And that was back in 2003. And therefore, I'm very lucky to have spent 18 years working to design the practice with my partners, create something which we think is a different type of international global practice. We want to be a design practice, but we want to create this very special platform for designers. So it's not just one designer on a top-down approach, which is dictating all the design, but a group of designers trying to research in their own interests, different areas of design. And therefore, we design our practice to be what we call diverse by design. We believe in diversity because it's important to have different voices. And each of us have different ways of thinking, we have different cultural backgrounds, we have different experiences and different skills. By putting all our minds together, we think we can, through this platform, create new ideas and new innovative ideas for different solutions of different scale of projects. And indeed, we believe so much, this is what we have in our website. We believe that a diverse world is a more interesting world. We also believe that local and global is very important. There's no point parachuting designers from across the globe and stay in the city for 2 days and create a design solution. We really believe that, especially in the Asia region, which is so different to the rest of the world, that the rate of growth, their own design problems, the regeneration problems, their own urban situation are all different climates, different culture. Therefore, we think that we need to be local in the sense that we have to design locally, but bringing in the global vision and innovation to see how we can push forward the envelope all the time. We have different types of discussion, different types of research, and different types of situation. And I think we want to design a practice that we have to know what's happening locally and therefore create something which is suitable for the locality and the context. So therefore, we have about 1,400 creative minds across 12 offices in the world. And each office have their own design studios. We do work together sometimes, or we do work separately. But our idea is to try to learn from each other, learn from experiences, so we get better chance of working on different types of projects. So how do we structure a firm which is different to the traditional one-man or very large-scale international practice? So we have our own way of developing our ideas. First of all, we are very collegiate. in the sense that we are very much like a university. We have different studios, around 30 global studios around the world. And each studio have got a studio leader, which is a designer. And then they actually have their own ideas how to approach their research and the design into their own really interesting agenda. And we allow that to happen because we think that everyone is interested in architecture and design. And because they know the local problems, they're able to create something which is, I think, more suitable to the region. And we believe regionalism is very important to the way architecture is going to be developed. And this is very relevant to how you resolve problems stemming from those individual locations. And because of that, we're able to do all different types of projects, different scale, from very small scale to super large scale, master planning, urban planning, infrastructure, hotels, mixed use, super high rises, cultural buildings. But the point is that we really have a way of doing design management, is that we don't dictate people what to design. We use kind of peer pressure to, like university, to let people know that they have to try to do something different and go forward. We don't have somebody say your design is not appropriate. We just look at the way they design, the intention, and as peers, we actually review the design together and see if they are a good solution for what they're proposing for a particular project or location. With that type of approach, we're very lucky. I think we end up having been able to select our projects and some of the projects to select us to be the architect. I'll take some examples, like for my team, for instance. This is a very boutique project in Hong Kong. It's a residential building, it's a private residential building for an art collector. If you know about Hong Kong is basically an island, it's on the slope. So the typology of residential building can be different to the rest of the world. You don't have traditional ground floor, you have the lounge and the sitting room and the dining room, and then upstairs are the bedrooms. Because it's on the hillside, that means there are different entrances to a building. We end up having the lounge and the sitting room at the top floor, and then the dining room below that, and then the sleeping quarters way below that. So it's a vertical typology, right, rather than a horizontal typology. And that type of approach is very, very local. It has to be in Hong Kong. It can be in nowhere else almost. And our concept came from, in fact, a lithograph done by the first European settler back 200 years ago in Hong Kong about the first impression of Hong Kong. If you've been to Hong Kong, you know Hong Kong Island is nothing but a piece of rock. There's nothing else. Unless you go to the waterfront now, they've got a huge CBD areas with lots of super high rise, but itself is just a piece of rock. And the first impression of this Westerner was just waterfall between two rocks. And that became the concept of how we drove forward our design. We felt that this is really a reflection of the story of Hong Kong, and the building should be about Hong Kong. So the water itself actually is a staircase. I'm not the first guy to invent that. I think Eric Mendelsohn did that before. But I think we want to create something that can reflect the core value of the family living inside. And because of the love of contemporary art, we use the staircase itself as a way to express on the surface of the building that this is something special about the family. And this is how the family connect, I think, intellectually, and also in terms of their interest, is through art. And the water itself, I later turned into 3 ice cubes stacking on top of each other. But the idea is to create something that is got movement, and it reflects the city itself. It's something which is very unique to Hong Kong, and it's about the story of Hong Kong itself. And because the staircase is actually kind of twisting and turning inside and outside, the spaces inside are also very interesting. And the structure and the details and the architecture are all one of the same. And the spaces are part of the storyline as well. And from the small project to a larger project, like this one in Guangzhou, it looks like a very standard office tower, but in China, things have very different requirements all the time. In this case, this simple tower, there are actually two owners. There are actually two owners, and they want to operate buildings separately or at the same time if they wish to. And also one of the owners said, I want to put some service apartments in the block as well. So this ended up being a jigsaw puzzle, and we put different requirements together to create this special building that works for everybody. And it's got to also respect the Guangzhou cityscape and skyline. And in order to pay respect to the beautiful TV tower, we actually step back the building to ensure that they have the best view of the tower itself. But projects get more complicated as you get more urban. I think the density in Asian cities are very dense, as you can see in this picture, but it's even denser when we go back to Hong Kong. We were very lucky to be involved in the West Kowloon Terminus, which is a high-speed rail station leading from Hong Kong to China. This is what we call a mega TOD, a transport-oriented development. It is a way to link cities, and it's quite sustainable. You don't use cars so much, you use railway to actually connect different cities to, in fact, shrink the size of China to make it all more accessible and better connected. Now, to create this type of project in a highly dense area is what we call coexistence architecture. You have a mega structure placed into a very dense urban area with very old cities and new requirements, old requirements. We basically have to insert something which will destroy a community very easily. So we are very careful in the way we consider how we connect the city back together again. It's more like a knitting job. You have to knit the city back together, create something which is whole, that you can actually ensure you can bring people together. You can see this image here. We're right in the heart of the city. It's one of the, I think, the largest underground high-speed rail station in the world. There was no precedence before, and I was very lucky to be involved in the early part of the project. The concept done by a colleague of mine, but I was leading a team of about 150 engineering consultants and architects to work on the idea of the project. If you can see, this is right in the heart of Kowloon. Just imagine, right? If you know Kowloon, this is only about 500 meters from Temple Street, which is a very traditional shopping street. You're able to walk 500 meters, take a train, and go to Beijing. So that's quite an amazing impact in terms of scale of travel and the way you can travel and connecting between cities. Create something like that, we have to understand how much we are taking away from the city and how much we are going to give back to the city. So we try to create a lot of public spaces, and we even use a rooftop to create a kind of public park so that we can contribute back to the city itself for the community and also for the people visiting Hong Kong. And it has to be a gateway to China. So the building itself must be able to create a strong, I think, sense of arrival or departure. And the architecture and the space are of one. And the gateway is actually not only just the building, but the space inside that takes you all the way from Hong Kong to China, to Shanghai, to Beijing and Chongqing. And therefore, working on something like this gives us a lot of different requirements, like different skills and different ideas on how to make it work, working with a lot of consultants, working as a team together to analyze and create something that has never been done before. So it's quite challenging, but it's also very rewarding. So how to craft a practice? I think I've been doing that for the past 20 years. And I think my advice for everybody is you try to design your career and your practice based on your personal interests. Everyone is different. It's not about the scale of the project. It's not about different types of problem. It's what your interests are. Some people are very interested in resolving urbanism issues. Some are very interested in creating public spaces. Some are very interested in just resolving problems. Some are interested in even technical aspect of architecture. You have to plan your career by thinking ahead, and you pursue it stage by stage, step by step. And in my experience, I feel there are three things that are very important when you leave college or university. If you want to plan for your future and plan for your practice, there are three things that are important. You try to capture somewhere you can work with ideas. They're always innovative, trying to push for the envelope. You go to somewhere which will give you the skill you can have to become an architect, and also the experience to work on different types of projects. I think we grow with experience. It's very important that we are able to touch and feel and do what we do. For instance, the house itself, the THR 350, the house in Hong Kong, it's a more bespoke project. So it's more like a traditional project that the architects has to be very hands-on everything is one-to-one. The way you design the envelope, the staircase, and then the details actually goes back to the design itself, to how people experience the space itself. So you have to resolve all the problems yourself. You've got to be very attentive and very focused. But when you go back to something which is very huge and big, then you've got to think big as well. You have to work with other consultants as a team, trying to find the right solution. Sometimes the solutions are about safety, about movement of people, efficiency, about the message to the city, about creating something which is unique, creating something that you have done on a piece of paper, but you want to make it real. And that takes a lot of, I think, skill from what you learn back in universities of different apps, your BIM, your different types of parametric modeling, your Rhino, your ideas. You go to factories to see how things are built, work out the structure of the consultants to create something that really works together as a single piece, holistic piece of architecture. And if you're able to do that, I think you can move up another scale. So we kind of more from bottom up to top rather than top down. If you're a planner, you work from top down, the big city, and then you work up different districts. But if we are architects, we can work from the bottom up by knowing all the functions, all the requirements. We start to see how we can help a city to mend itself. In this case, it's a project we're working on currently. We have to somehow use this mega TOD again, this transport structure to regenerate the whole city. How to bring community back together because it's split by the railway lines. So how do we knit the city back together? How do you create connectivity and green spaces that new public spaces for the city itself to relieve a very densely populated kind of old area within a major city? How do you create public spaces and in fact retail to create a lot of atmosphere, a lot of fun and games and some spaces for the community to enjoy, and it kind of just make the city live again. And another thing about working under different cultural settings, I've been doing that for the past 20 or 30 years, I'd say. I worked in United Kingdom, France, Germany, Middle East, Dubai, Singapore, China, Hong Kong. So I feel that I always work in different cultural settings. And the thing I find about the most, I think, important point to me is that you have to understand the local culture. And that takes time. It's not easy to just go in and do something and come back out again. If you do an office building, it's fine, it's just for working. But if you're doing a project, it's got a close relationship to people using the space permanently, not for commercial reasons, then it becomes something that you have to really understand what people really want locally and create a solution which is appropriate. I'm using an example which I did, which is senior headquarters or Weibo headquarters in Beijing in China. They are one of the major media tech company in China. They've got probably 200 million subscribers. And it's a bit like Facebook and it's a bit like YouTube as well. They're the very strong media company. And the logo of the company is the eye of Sina you see here, which is to them, they call it the eye to the world. That means they're using the portal itself to see the world. The world can see China through this portal. And my first meeting with the chairman, and he said to me, "No palace." Now, I was really surprised. So I said, "What do you mean?" I don't think my team know what he meant, and nor did his management team know what he meant. He said, "No palace." And it came out that what he really meant was that don't spend his funding on a beautiful mega lobby or a beautiful office for himself. He really wants to spend the money on his staff to create a very amazing working environment and a very healthy working environment. So I said, I got it. From then, I was able to develop my concept because it's in Beijing. We study thousands of years of courtyard buildings. This is being an enclosed campus. We decided to create courtyards. We look at a very simple figure of 8 circulation pattern. We call it limitless. And in the center is a major space we call the Eye of Sina, which is the the center focal point of the company. And then with this enclosed box, we started to just do something very simple, just pushing and pulling of the facade to create entrances, special spaces, double height spaces, secondary entrances. A very simple move to create something that is kind of readable on the outside. We think that it should be a simple building. This is a fairly large building, 200 meters by 90 meters. And you can see the two courtyards in the center and then the main space. You can see how we actually slightly push the building inwards to create an entrance. So it's a readable building. Although its scale is large, we still want to maintain some sort of dialogue to the public as well. And the courtyards are very welcome by the staff themselves. They use it all the time during spring, summer, and autumn.
Excuse me.
And it's part of the...
sorry, there is only 1 minute left. Sorry to...
I'm almost finished.
Okay.
I'm almost finished. And the staff actually use it for the staff canteen. The staff canteen is well used by the staff to work there as well. So the building is a simple statement, and we just create a special movement on the facade to create the kind of entrances we wanted to create. And of course, in the center of the whole thing is about great working environment. The staff just enjoy working there all the time. Lots of great natural light, daylight, and a fantastic air quality inside. And in the center is the Eye of Senior, which is the huge LED screen. And it's really the window to the world. And this is how we understood the company culture and the culture of what they're trying to do in China. And this is a fairly successful project. People are very happy working inside. So one final, I think, advice to everyone. I think your future is in your hands. When you leave the university, feel confident, believe in yourself, and just go for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. We're just going to shift into a short 2-minute break, and then we'll come back with the next presentation.
So we'll come back on 25 past. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we'll resume now. It's already 27. Florian, are you ready to present? Oh.
Yeah, you unmuted me. Okay, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Okay, I'll do the intro. Okay, joining us from New York City is Florian Eidingberg. He's an internationally renowned architect with over 2 decades of professional experience. He worked as an associate for Sana in Tokyo, where he oversaw the firm's US projects such as the Toledo Museum of Art and the New Museum. After successfully completing the new museum in New York, he co-founded Soil, a mid-sized practice with Jin Liu in 2008. With a global design perspective, Florian and Jing completed numerous award-winning projects internationally, including the Kajay Gallery in Seoul, which won them an AIA New York Design Award in 2011. More recently, in this year, they completed the CTF Museum, Zhao Daifo, in Hong Kong for K11 Art Foundation. Florian is also a distinguished academic. He has taught as GSAP, GSD, MIT, and now serving as visiting professor at Princeton School of Architecture. Welcome, Florian.
Hi guys, let me see if I'm sharing the correct screen. Yeah, this works, right? I think it's there or not? Yeah, you see it. Yep. Thank you for having me. I understand that we're going to talk about practice and why practice and how to start a practice. So I won't show too much of our work. But I thought it would be most useful to spend these 20 minutes to really speak about, how to start and when to start and what is the transition, so to say, into starting a practice. What happens, after you come out of school, and at what moment do you start a practice? Some of this comes from the fact, and I don't know where everybody is on the call or in this presentation in their career, but I was at the GSD for 10 years. And in the last, I think, 4 years, I taught one of the professional practice courses. The real one was taught by Paul, and the sort of funny one was taught by me. And Iñaki Abalos, who was the chair at that time, asked me to teach this idea exactly to young graduates or people who are about to graduate, is sort of how to start practice. And so the first question, and Ken mentioned some of this already in his talk, is that everybody has their own motivation in a way to practice, but you have to in some way try to discover at this sort of transition. Sorry, can somebody mute themselves? Why would you practice in the first place? And I think this is very personal, but I think it's really important that you try to figure out what are the things that ultimately motivate you to become a practitioner, because it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of perseverance. It doesn't happen just overnight. It's something that you need to continue to work at. In my case, so this is a little bit autobiographical, but I think it will help you understand what sort of became my driver. I studied in Delft in the Netherlands in the 90s when the Dutch felt really good about themselves. There was a book published, MVRDV, on the cover called Super Dutch. And there was this idea that there was a Dutch sort of pragmatist approach towards architecture, very diagrammatic. And I think some firms now are proving its success, but it really was sort of based in the 90s, a sort of very dry, very pragmatic architectural approach, super rational, super Dutch. It was right at the time that I was graduating, and I actually did my first job at NL Architects. It's going to be more Dutch, NL for the Netherlands, and the building on the right is the building I worked on. I worked on this actually when I quit school before I graduated, because I lost sort of confidence in academia. I thought all the fun is in making buildings, and there's very little fun in learning about how to make buildings. And so I ended up working there before I graduated at NL, and this is the building I worked on. But I was very suspicious of this method, and I thought I need to go elsewhere. And again, Ken mentioned this as well. I think going to different cultures and finding, different places to check, what is it that, is architecture, is very, very productive. And so I graduated and I learned Japanese, and I moved to Tokyo, to Sana, most importantly to Kazuyo Sejima, who had been teaching at the Berlage Institute, and I joined, and I was really fascinated, mostly because it seemed so different from what I understood. And so before, I wanted to start my own practice, and actually my contemporaries and everybody actually at that moment, it was so obvious to come out of school and start your practice. That my contemporaries, they called themselves next architects. And I thought, well, if they're next, there's nothing after that. So I cannot start my practice now. I need to go elsewhere, and I need to learn something that is so different from what I have learned before. And so I would say one of the, checks is don't stay within your comfort zone, but go somewhere else. You see here me being semi uncomfortable in Japan. I worked at Sana for 8 years. I worked there at a moment when the firm was transitioning towards doing more international work. It gave me the opportunity to get very quickly involved in very serious projects. So I ended up managing and leading the competition and the realization of the glass pavilion for the Toledo Museum of Art in Toledo, Ohio. And this is also where I met Jing Liu, my partner in the firm. She studied, or she is from Nanjing in China. She went to high school in Tokyo, studied at Tulane, and we met at Sana. We both worked on this project for a while, and I ended up continuing. She ended up going to New York and working for KPF, and later we joined forces. So I worked on this project at the Toledo Museum, glass pavilion of art, and the new Museum of Contemporary Art in New York City. And so these two projects were very important for me and for the career that followed. I had the opportunity to work within a very foreign context for me. Tokyo was very different from what I was used to, and I wasn't from the US either, so I was working in the US representing a firm and a culture that I wasn't necessarily from, and it gave me for some reason a lot of freedom, because I couldn't necessarily, because I was so I felt so free from being tied into a certain culture, and it really liberated myself, and it allowed me to be quite frank and very clear in sort of representing Japanese culture in American culture without sort of feeling the pressures of my own sort of context and my own history bearing on me. And so these two projects obviously gave me some, a lot of very good technical experience. It allowed me to work with a lot of and very great engineers, and it also brought me into contact with a lot of people. I wanted to show, I mean, obviously I learned a ton working at Sana. We worked 16 hours a day, 8 hours, or 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. So really, really intense. I wanted to show this funny image. I think you guys will enjoy. You see Junya Ishigami here, is maybe well known now, but what I was saying is that the Sana, working at a firm like this, when you're young, is a real sort of breeding ground of sort of intense exploration, but it also exposes you to a whole wide range of things like media, working very directly with contractors who are very ambitious, meeting artists, meeting museum directors, etc. And so for me, it was a real great, opportunity. And so after Sejima and Nishizawa said bye-bye, I was left on my own in 2007, and we started our practice. What was sort of the bridge between my professional experience and my own practice was teaching. And a lot of people, especially in the US, people that go to the GSD as well, they wonder what is the role of teaching as a basis to start your practice. And In my experience, it was a very useful one. So through Sana, I ended up in American academia. I taught 3 studios with them at Princeton, where I'm currently teaching, and I was able to write a book about sort of those studios. Stan Allen was very grateful or gracious in giving us the opportunity to write this book, and it allowed me again to also reach out to people like Iwan Baan, the photographer with whom we're working now, and sort of build, and expand sort of the network. Toshiko Mori was really generous as well in offering me a job at the GSD. She asked Nishizawa first to teach, and I taught with Nishizawa, and that's how I ended up at the GSD. So here you see some old school GSD pictures with Sanford Quinter and Atelier Bow Wow and Mark Mulligan, who maybe some of you know on reviews. And that sort of transitional zone between leaving a paid job at Sana, and it didn't pay a lot, but it gave me a lot of experience. But you have to sort of get around, and you don't have clients or anybody to support you. And starting your practice teaching helped me sort of float that. So 2008, Jing and I, and we had our one daughter at the moment, decided to start our firm. 8 years of experience at Sana. Jing had worked about 4 years at KPF. And so we decided this is the moment to start. And we started in Brooklyn, New York. And so New York for us was a reason, was interesting to start because we were, neither one of us was from New York. So we chose deliberately to be both equally foreign in a certain place and start a practice there in New York as, both of us feeling quite international and cosmopolitan. New York seems to be the capital of sort of this world that is where everybody sort of passes through. And this is maybe another piece of advice that I used to give when I taught ProPrac, is I said everybody who ever will commission an architect comes to New York once a year. Maybe things have changed now, and I think the world is shifting, and we can talk about that later. But when we started, New York was a very important place, and many people who were looking for an architect, they would at least come to New York once a year. So we started in 2008. However, a month later, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. And that meant that at that moment in New York City, half of the firms closed, and most architectural jobs, were gone. So how to start in the middle of a crisis? I would argue that was actually really good. And now we have a crisis this year as well. And it's a great time to start a practice. Sejima herself started her practice also in the middle of a crisis. I said crises, as you all know, are opportunities, because they mean there is something is going to change. There is a new sort of reset, and there's a space for new voices. So if there's any good moment to start with practice, it would be now. In our case, we ended up renting a very cheap space. Later it turned into an elevator lobby in a building in Dumbo. And we just started to work. We started to work, but we also started to invent work. There wasn't not necessarily work, but I will show the few things that we had and sort of the seeds that we planted that led to our practice. One is we started to do competitions, and not just by doing a competition like nearby, but our first competition was a nursery school in Italy. And so obviously it doesn't make sense at all to have a small scale project of a nursery school on the other side of the world from New York to Italy. They would never hire us. We knew probably there was no chance to win. I did this competition with 2 students from the GSD in one of the rooms, I think on the 4th floor at the trays at the GSD. Obviously we didn't win, but we were able to produce a quite good design, and we also produced a really beautiful model that became part of an exhibition and became part of a discussion about what's the role of architecture in educating buildings. And so it started to live sort of a life of its own. Through Sana, I picked up a few projects that they didn't want to do. This is Derek Lamb's offices. So Sana ended up doing the store for Derek Lamb, and the back of house we took up as our first job. And similarly, we took up a house project where the son, who was basically the son of the client, ended up taking my job at Sana when I left. And so we ended up designing the house for his parents. It wasn't built, but it was sort of the first 2 paying jobs. What we also did was very early on make a website and make everything that we did a project. And so not just build projects, but also writing, teaching, any sort of thing. And so I think the first thing we actually invested in was making a website. Jeff Han, the graphic designer who also made the Sana book, who's actually from Hong Kong, originally lives in New York now, designed our website. And one of the best advices he gave is make everything seem like a project, because in the beginning you have to seem sort of bigger than you are. And last thing, and this is maybe something people don't really talk about much, but I had a trusted friend of my parents. He actually passed away this year, but he was a good family friend who happened to live in New York. And he had an experience in finance and banking and young businesses. And he was very happy to just give us advice. He didn't know anything about architecture. He said, "This is the worst idea you have to start, a firm." But he was generous enough to just help us understand running a business. What does it mean to get money in, get money out? Very simple steps, but find people in your network who have no interest in architecture, are just interested in having you understand what a business is. A business is, in architectural cases, selling hours. You sell hours of design services. Find somebody who's uninterested in architecture, is uninterested in the project, but is only interested in how to run a business, and have that person be the person that you can talk to. Specifically, it's great if somebody who's like beyond a career and who's just there interested in advising. I continue to teach. This is maybe nostalgic to some people. Scott Cohen, Nader Teherani, and well, doesn't matter. The other thing that I did, which I think is also important in the beginning, is you want to bring your name out, and buildings take very long. And so I started to write. I started to write for whatever I could. And at some point I was writing for Domus, and it gave me an opportunity not only to just have sort of our name published more regularly. It also allowed the opportunity to reach out to firms, to reach out to magazines, to build up a network. And that's ultimately, in the beginning, it's really important. Just build a network, build connections, build contact points around the world. And so that led also to more teaching, more lecturing, and through all these places, I think in the beginning, invest in expanding your network, expand the places of contact where you can work, expand the people you can work with, expand the people that can that know about you. As mentioned, I will not talk so much about our projects, but there's two projects that were really essential for us. One was winning the Young Architects program for MoMA PS1. We won it in 2009. In 2010, it was built. It's a very small, lightweight, installation. It's not a big deal, but at the same time, it's the MoMA in New York City, and they endorse you. And so we worked really, really hard on a project like this, which certainly doesn't make money, but gives you a ton of exposure. In the beginning, for us, we realized nobody's going to hire us because we do it the cheapest. People want to hire you because who you are. And so how do you become a brand, that people want to hire, rather than a service that people want to get, as cheap as possible. So for us, high profile, maybe low profit in the beginning was really important. This was one where we spent a lot of time on to make sure that we won it, and it gave us a lot of exposure, and it led to many more things to come. And the second project that I think was really important for us was our first build project, which we also took very, very serious. This project came to us by chance. Somebody in New York asked somebody else if they knew anybody who could do a cheap art space, or do you know a cheap architect who can do a space for art. We had just finished a new museum, so somebody suggested, why don't you call the guy who finished that building and see if they want to do it. And we came in. This is in Seoul, in Korea, in the north, near the palace, in the old sort of Hanok area, Kukchi Gallery. And we worked very hard with the client to build something that fit very nicely in the historic context, but also gave Kukchi Gallery, a very ambitious gallery, a quite strong presence architecturally, because they needed to sort of manifest themselves. This project became part of the MoMA collection. It became part of the Art Institute in Chicago collection, and it really helped raise our profile. It was our first build project. And for it, we really went out of our way, meaning we ended up going to Anping in China to hand weld together 500,000 rings, this handcrafted skin. It certainly, I was teaching at the GSD at the time. I was flying every weekend to Seoul to work with the contractor, and we had we just had our second child as well, so we were really burning the midnight oil, so to say, which is maybe something I picked up working for Sana. But in the beginning, we just invested heavily in sort of these build works. So now this is more 12 years in, so 2018 is sort of when we felt okay, the first 10 years we established ourselves. You see Jing here now. We are in downtown Brooklyn. Pre-COVID, we were at 30 people. We had to scale down a little bit, but I think it will come back. And I think, what I also realized, I saw already one question in the chat is like, now there's crisis, is the world going to change forever? I had to think of I.M. Pei and, his career that, lasted so long, or somebody like Frank Lloyd Wright, and very long careers in life, has its ups and downs, but architecture is a very slow profession. And going back to the beginning, why practice? For us, it is, we really believe in the culture of architecture. We do believe that you have to make money, but ultimately for us in the long term, it is meaningful to work on something that we care about, which is about producing culture. And so we scaled down a little bit now for the crisis, but we're also quite optimistic that things will come back again. Diversity has been for us really important. So having many different cultures come together. That's why we're in New York. We pride ourselves on speaking 12 languages. We work in different design languages as well, very digital, but also very physical and models. We've worked now all over the world. So when we started in 2008, I got one good piece of advice from Ben van Berkel. He said, you have to be able to take on any kind of job anywhere around the world at any moment. And so, again, going back to that school in Italy, be ready to sort of, take on whatever you can. And so having worked mostly, in culture, we've expanded into private homes, social housing. This is a project we're working on currently in León in Mexico. Landscape and sort of urban planning. This is a master plan we're doing now in Melbourne for the arts precinct together with Hustle. So we also partner with larger firms and just try to figure out ways to get into areas that we haven't worked on. But the base has always been culture and cultural projects. We have worked a bit in China as well. I've not been able to realize anything yet. This is our competition entry. We became second for the Shanghai Museum in Pudong. And I wanted to end with the project that just recently opened indeed in Hong Kong on West Kowloon as part of the large New World development in the K11 Mall and CTF Museum indeed. Which is really interesting. So Jing, was at KPF. This is a KPF project while the project was under construction. And because, you see in the back M+ being built, suddenly there was a realization we need to have, a serious cultural attractor also here on this side, because otherwise everybody ends up on the west side of Kowloon. So while the building was being built, we were asked to insert 2 floors of museum program on top of the retail component. And so, under very, intensive time pressure, we were able to build this sort of art, which is now sort of a kunsthal. It has a very long history, which I won't get into with a lot of detail. But so the interest here was, how do you create something that's really distinct from the very intense multi-mixed use program into something that is a space for art and a space for contemplation and a space for culture. And I was just joking with Ken, because we ended up now doing another project, the UCCA project. I don't have images here in Shanghai at the base of the tower. And so in some way, being able to work with a variety of people in a variety of contexts on projects of culture is what is dear to us, and I think we've worked intensively towards such position. This we just realized, it just finished, has been published last week. We're very proud and excited about it. So if you want to see more of our work, you can find it at the A+EU monograph that we just published. And I think the rest should be conversation. So Paul, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Florian. And we're moving on to the discussion section. Justin, would you like to introduce Paul?
Yeah, so Paul, we've just sent you an email with some of the questions that we've compiled so far.
Sure.
Would you like to have a 2-minute break before we begin, just to have a look through them, or should I just introduce you?
Let's go, because in the interest of time, and then we can probably give people just a little bit more time also in the breakout rooms.
Okay. Okay, so the moderator for the evening is Paul Nakazawa, Associate Professor in Practice of Architecture at the GSD. His professional career spans more than 4 decades, during which time he has worked in the capacity of a managing principal for leading design practices in corporate firms, an international practice and business advisor, university educator, and as an external board member. He currently serves as the chairman of Snøhetta's New York practice and vice chairman of Mass Design Group in Boston. Thank you, Paul, for joining us this evening.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for inviting me as moderator. Really interesting presentations. Everyone touched on different subjects. I would be curious, I think, as a lead question to everyone, how you knew you were ready to enter into practice. So it's one thing to get your first project, but how do you know you're ready? I mean, what motivates you to take the step to be in practice? So maybe we go with now first. I mean, how did you know you were ready, or you never know you're ready?
Yeah, I think it's more along those lines, where you never know you're quite ready.
But I mean, is it an act of desperation, or when you go like, but we have to do this now? I mean, how do you cross that threshold? Because
Right.
Everyone has to think about their own motivations and preparation, and then at some point you have to decide that yes, this is the time. What are the factors that allow you to cross that threshold?
Well, I think throughout our professional career, there were moments like when you were working for someone, at the same time when you're learning a lot, but you also face a lot of frustration, because there are also like this drive that you want to somehow have a little bit more ownership or have a little bit more control with your work. And I think throughout our professional lives, like there are moments that we wanted to break out, but then we were also too timid to do so. And the tipping point, it happens when at the time we were working in London, and we were really debating whether we should move back to Hong Kong or just stay in the UK for a longer period of time, because that was we felt that was the moment when we sort of have to decide, like, because both of us never really thought like practicing in Hong Kong would be something eventually we would end up doing, just because of the scarcity of land and the difficulty of getting projects in Hong Kong. Like, we thought it would be really, really hard for us to do that in Hong Kong. And just because like family and like both of our families are in Hong Kong, so eventually we thought, okay, let's move back to Hong Kong. And because of that, we thought maybe let's take this as an opportunity. Like, if we were just move back to Hong Kong and then join a big practice, we might never have this opportunity again to like really just go out and try out and do our own thing. And so that's kind of like where the situation gave us the courage, I guess, to start our own practice.
Great. And Florian?
I think Grace just answered the whole thing in the chat, but it's indeed the moment that you don't see growth anymore in what you're doing. So at the moment that you start repeating yourself, or actually, and I think, you know, in my case, what was really interesting was a transition from Sana being, you know, really focused on the Japanese market to becoming much more international. At some point I realized, okay, I'm the only person in a way doing this, but I cannot grow. I could not grow within the culture of that office. There was no more position for me to get beyond. And so I would just be continuing to do the same thing, which is in a way be an ambassador. And I decided it was time to be my own ambassador.
That's great. And Ken, you're in slightly a different situation, but what are thresholds for you, either to switch jobs or to go to a different kind of practice?
Ken might be having a little bit of technical difficulty.
Okay.
He's been trying to join in, but yeah.
Okay.
So maybe we can come back to him.
Yeah. You know, in my career as an advisor, firms have had issues that happen in the first, third, fifth, seventh, and 15th year of their existence. They're of different natures. So I'll characterize some of them that I've commonly run across, which is, you know, people who've run into extraordinary problems in their first year probably haven't done the proper preparation in order to be in practice. They don't have a thesis, or they don't have sufficient reasons to have been in there. So it's an ill-advised kind of adventure. In year 3, you may have had an initial idea about what you wanted to do, but you were not successful then in creating the basis for continuity. And I think Florian has described in some ways the efforts to create that level of continuity through different mechanisms. In year 5, it's over. Your beginner's luck has expired, and now you have to have had an understanding somewhat of your possibilities within a specific either market, client. I mean, some other mechanisms have to take over, or you wilt. And in year 7, you find that people who may have helped you start the practice are no longer sufficiently experienced to help you to the next stage. And so building your organization in year 7 becomes a major problem. And then year 15, your practice is crystallized. You're no longer beginners, and you own your own kind of identity by that time. So it's just in making your way through that. New Office Works is in year 3.
That's right.
and Florian is coming up on year 15. So you guys are you know, at the end of beginner's luck. What do you see after this? What do you? I'm in admiration of your beginning in terms of doing these films, which I think helped you understand the basis of creating a thesis for your practice, so that in fact it was a way of getting to a proof of concept with actual projects. So what do you see next? I mean, do you have a plan for year 5, year 7?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, the kind of early idea of research and how research plays into a practice was really important for us. Especially, I think when we set out to start an office, without necessarily, you know, we had 1 or 2 small interior design projects, but essentially, I think most of our time was spent on the question of what is important to a practice and what proportion of research can help generate either ideas for projects that may come in the future, or even self-initiated projects. And I think for the next steps, as Florian mentioned, it's really about how to build a foundation to constantly be rethinking what is the identity of the practice, because I think that's really how you grow to the next level. It's not so much about, let's say, services, not necessarily reliant on services that you provide, but really about how do other people recognize how you stand out as an office.
Right. And all of you have touched on the issue of social capital. So in the case of mechanisms of creating that social connection, for those of you who've created social connections within Hong Kong specifically, it would probably be a different strategy than someone like Florian, whose social connectivity has actually had to have been a different strategy in order to practice in a global way. So maybe, Ken is back with us in terms of creating that social network. You know, can you describe a little bit about specificity of place and the ability to be in a place? So oftentimes when you're at quote at home, you can do more things because people know who you are. So it's less about your competency and more about whether you're trusted. Whereas if you are all over the world, it's as a practitioner, it's a slightly different issue. So Ken, can you talk about that? Because Aedas has, you know, many offices, and so you're a global practice, but you also are interested in locality. So what role does this social network have for you in terms of development?
I think it's very important when you're working on different types of project where the locality is very important. Some of the projects are very related to communities. Then you have to know what they're thinking about, how they behave, what's the cultural background, the behavior. By being there, you're able to have a direct contact and able to provide, look at different solutions, understand the problems, and create something which would, I think, suit them locally. But whilst at the same time, if a project needs a lot of international innovation, you can actually bring those ideas back into the discussion as well. So people know you, people understand you have resources, they can actually engender a conversation, and then from that conversation, develop a brief and find, I think, more and better solutions to something that you're trying to do. For instance, we do a lot of major projects like transport-oriented developments, which are mega projects. You bring maybe 10 million square feet together. How do you create a community? How do you ensure you don't destroy an existing community? Then you need to have this understanding of the local issues, and then you have to know what the technology can do. Together, you create something that is right for the location. We sometimes do bring in, if we're doing an R&D facilities for Alibaba, then we may say, well, we will understand how the Chinese R&D development is doing right now, but how does the US doing it? Are there different culture in terms of how you do research? Are the grouping, are they different in terms of grouping of scientists and grouping of researchers? Do they behave differently in terms of culture? That is the kind of question you can propose to your local users and get the feedback and see if they're able to change the culture to suit the international way of working, or they can actually adapt to a local working style. So that kind of conversation do bring a lot of possibilities.
Given the scale of China as a society and Hong Kong being so dense, is that really the purview of just large firms, or can smaller practices actually participate in creating this connectivity? I mean, even for a larger firm, is it possible to interact between a firm like Aedas and smaller practices?
I think it's not about the scale of practice at all. It's
Right.
about the thinking behind it and the way you want to experiment. Some projects would demand a lot of experimentation because there is a certain problem you want to resolve. Some are more normal in the sense that it is a set set rules to resolve certain problems. But there are lots of very small local practice in China, which are great designers actually, and they're working on really amazing projects, either cultural or even commercial. We're looking into how people can live and how they spend, and with this new economy in China, with a non-cash economy, there are lots of ways that the behavior is different to the Western world sometimes. So that type of discussion and research actually is very interesting. So it's not the scale of practice, it's the ideas behind it's important. So some small practice are doing some fantastic jobs, beautiful projects, and really understand the local culture and condition. Really amazing.
Florian? And as someone located in New York, but with Asian experience, would you say that having your experience at Sana was essential in terms of understanding quite a different part of the world where the actual conditions of density and other things are much different from the US? I'm kind of maybe answering the question for you, but you've made allusion to New York being the kind of center of the universe with regard to architecture, but is there a case to be made, but maybe in the next 20 years, this isn't really the case?
Yeah, no, I think all those things are very fair. And, you know, I build up my story with the idea that in the Netherlands, we believed the Netherlands was the center of the universe for a while.
Right.
But going to Asia, I realized that there's many different centers of universes, and Tokyo is one as well. And so apart from learning, you know, very different ways of how to operate as architects in different urban conditions, I think the cultural experience was also really important. And just realizing how, you know, decisions are made, how to behave, how, you know, literally within cultural contexts that are maybe, you know, foreign to you, how do you find a way to get things done, you know, in very, very different contexts. And ultimately, you know, our first build project was in Seoul in Korea, and I didn't have a lot of experience in Korea and Korean culture for that matter. But the ability to be flexible, I think, and find ways to operate within, you know, conditions that are, you know, like particular for every context. I think that's a skill set, so that you don't get too fixed in, you know, a single way of thinking how things should be done, because there's always different ways to do things. And I think you can learn a lot from working with others and how to do things differently.
So to everyone, it seems that practice in a previous implementation of practice was much more singular in terms of focus. I mean, you could be a practitioner with a much more singular focus. And now it seems more the contextual issues of how people live and occupy their respective places. And, you know, it's about living within a much more complex world. Those singular kind of hypotheses about what your practice is about seems to have, in a sense, gone away. But it seems that the risk is that it looks like you're doing the kitchen sink when in fact you're not. So one of the key things I think Ken said was that you choose your projects and the projects choose you. And so one of the interesting things about practice right now, in my terms, from what I sit, is that the nature of competition has actually changed. That architects think, oh, you know, we're actually in competition with each other, and in some senses we're not. I mean, it looks like we are because, you know, you have an RFP or you have a competition or whatever, but it's this idea of the complexity of your own kind of trajectories intersecting with specific opportunities where you're thinking and your capacity and your ability to mobilize seems to agglomerate around this kind of mutual attraction. And maybe for someone like Paul and Evelyn, you're discovering that yourselves as you enter your fourth year of practice.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that definitely has been a question that we also being constantly confronted with, particularly in Hong Kong, because like you said, we have been practicing for 3 years now, and we realized that most of the jobs that we get are not necessarily like, you know, given a brief and then you design an object of like a unified sort of design language. Very often you are either asked to add on to something else, or like you are be a small part of a bigger puzzle. So we're actually working on a project with a local developer, which the tower is actually, again, designed by Ken's colleague, by Aedas. And then, you know, and also there were a lot of different designers involved, a little bit like the K11 that Florian also were involved with. So, you know, we realized that in Hong Kong, I think, you know, maybe you guys can also tell me a little bit of insight, but I don't know whether this is something that the developer in Hong Kong are actually moving towards too, like they, rather than hiring a single designer that, you know, sort of take care of the entire building from, you know, the overall massing, like, to, you know, to its stair or to its handrail, but rather like they seems to want to shop for many different designers and have sort of this kaleidoscope of ideas. So, you know, we found that at the beginning it's slightly weird, but then more and more we see that that seems to be the way it is nowadays, at least in Hong Kong. So, and we are still trying to find a way to navigate through this sort of working methods. And like Florian's mentioned, somehow you just have to be really adaptable. Like, you know, you only have this many opportunities, and do you say, oh, if I'm working with someone else, I would rather not do it. You just don't have the position to say that. So within that realm, like, how can you still maintain your own voice while working cohesively with the rest of the team? So that seems to be something that we have been facing so far.
Yeah, it speaks to Ken's issue of diversity. So a city that isn't diverse is pretty boring. And so it seems that you, Florian, I mean, you have kind of also infill projects within these larger infrastructures that are established by larger practices, where the commission requires huge levels of capacity in order to actually get the project done. I mean, a lot of it's management, right? Just of these processes. But in order for developers and other clients to maintain kind of diversity of occupancy and vision, that they create, I'm trying to make this argument that actually, as interstices of complexity open, there's more room for smaller practices, and it's not an extinction event of smallness. It's actually the demand for diversity then creates these spaces for new practices within these kind of highly complex and dense environments.
I agree, and I think
would all of you agree with that statement?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in a little bit in what we have been doing. And I think what I learned at Sana, you know, we were always representing the design architect, and then there was the executive architect. And I feel now the model is getting actually more complex, in a sense that there is a series of, you know, everybody is a designer, everybody's an architect in some way. The whole project is a design exercise. But you know, you get a more complex teams where everybody brings something to the table. And so what we've been doing a lot recently is not actually waiting for a client, but actually, you know, reaching out to potential partners, which could be large corporate firms, but it can also be large developers who are developing, you know, entire areas, you know, of cities, to say, hey, what we can bring to the table is one component, which is the cultural component. And so there's retail, there's residential, there's a whole bunch of different things. You know, we can help you in shaping the cultural component. And so that has led to new sort of relationships. And I think K11 is an example of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think you've got to pick a battle. I think it's important if you are a more boutique practice. The word diversity came from my presentation and from Florian as well. And that's, I think, it's the core value of what architecture is about nowadays. It's not a singular piece of design. I mean, you may have a holistic strategy, but there are many components in there which have to say different voices and do different things. This is how the world is like nowadays. It's very global. I think the more you do, the more project you do, I think the scale will perhaps increase, or maybe you don't want to scale anyway. You just want to have the type of project you can resolve different problems. And the way we do it is that we take each project as a problem solving exercise. We try to do it that way and try to create some type of ideas and new ideas into our projects. If it's a pure commercial project, then of course there's some standard parameters you're going to follow. But that doesn't mean that you don't have creativity. Like the tower I did in Guangzhou, it's a standard office, but I realized there are two owners and they're different program to the brief. And from that, we started to look at the function of the tower and then how it respond to the city by setting back the top part and creating a very interesting language at the top to talk to the city itself. So there are ways that you can actually implement your ideas, even though it's a commercial building. It's how you see, I think, solving your problem and bringing into new ideas and listening to other ideas from other architects. Then you actually learn a lot and you actually see things differently.
Jeffrey, I think we're at time for breakout.
Yes. So
thanks to everyone for your questions and everything. It's trying to keep the
yes, thanks
to the schedule a little bit. But Ken and I will be in one of the breakout rooms, and Paul and Evelyn will be in another.
So the rooms have been created. So there should be a pop-up that lets you select which one to go on to.
Oh, yeah.
And then we talk for what, 10 minutes, and then we all come back to the plenary.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, wait, where should we go?
I'll go into the hall and flooring. I'll go to new office works. And does one of you?
I'm gonna go to Ken's.
Okay.
I'll go to new office works.
Sure.
Everybody's going to Florian's, so let's join Ken's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Adrian. Wait, I can't actually move myself.
Wait, I can't find you on the list. Maybe because you're a host.
What? Am I just stuck here?
I downgraded you. Let's see. Wait, you're not even in the thing at all. Oh, I see you. You're good. You want you want Paul, right? Evelyn. There you go.
I think the other group, Adrian, didn't want to leave that group.
Time for us.
But to conclude the thought, they're complementary.
Okay, I think everybody is back now.
Back, everyone. So we'll just have a few concluding remarks. Thank you everyone who came to join us today, especially moderator Paul. I think I speak for all of my classmates when I say that these incredibly frank and honest and open conversations that we've had here today have been just really helpful as a student to learn about what life is like after graduation, and these conversations that don't always take place in a formal context in the GSD. So thank you all for that. So we will have a recording of this up on our website after this evening, and then please also look forward to additional events along a similar vein from us next semester. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
It's been a very fruitful evening.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.